The air inside the Gilded Spoon always felt warm, thick with the comforting scent of garlic, simmering tomato sauce, and fresh-baked bread. It was a small, family-run Italian place, the kind with red and white checkered tablecloths and Chianti bottles serving as candle holders. Every night it was filled with the gentle hum of happy conversations, the clinking of glasses, and most importantly, the music. In the far corner, tucked away like a treasured secret, stood a grand piano. It was an old, beautiful instrument with wood that gleamed under the soft spotlights. And every evening, an elderly man named Arthur would sit on the worn bench, his fingers dancing across the keys. He played the old standards, the kind of songs that made you feel nostalgic even if you weren't sure why. His music was the heartbeat of the restaurant, a gentle, flowing river that tied all the separate conversations and clattering plates together into one harmonious experience. And then there was Anna. Anna was a waitress, a shadow moving efficiently through the lively chaos. She was in her late 20s with a kind face that she kept carefully neutral. She was good at her job, very good. She could balance 3 full plates on one arm, remember a complex order without writing it down, and refill a water glass before it was even half empty. She moved with a quiet grace, her dark hair tied back in a simple ponytail. Her standard-issue black apron a constant fixture around her waist. To the customers, she was just the waitress who brought their food and took their plates away with a polite, almost invisible smile. To her coworkers, she was a bit of a mystery. She didn't join in the gossip in the kitchen or share stories about her weekend. When her shift was over, she'd say a quiet goodbye and disappear into the night. She was an observer, always on the outside looking in, but there was one place where her carefully constructed wall of invisibility seemed to crumble, if only for a moment. That was the piano, whenever she had a spare second waiting for a table's food to be ready, or slipping behind the host stand to catch her breath, her eyes would find Arthur. She wouldn't stare, not exactly. It was more like a magnetic pull. She would watch his hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, move with an elegance that defied their years. She would listen to the melodies he coaxed from the strings, and a profound sadness would wash over her features. It was a look of such deep, aching longing that it made her seem like a completely different person. The music was a key, and it was unlocking a room inside her that she had kept shut for a very long time. Each note was a memory. A gentle arpeggio reminded her of dust motes dancing in a sunbeam, of the smell of old wood and lemon polish. A soaring chorus brought back the feeling of smooth, cool ivory beneath her own small fingers. A melancholic minor chord echoed a voice, a gentle voice humming along, encouraging her, telling her she was special. These memories were both beautiful and painful. They were a ghost from a life she no longer lived, a person she used to be. So she watched from a distance, drawn to the music like a moth to a flame, yet terrified of getting burned. She always made sure to give the piano a wide berth when clearing tables, as if the instrument itself held a dangerous power. One busy Friday, a young couple at one of her tables noticed her gaze. "The pianist is wonderful tonight," the man said with a smile. "He really adds something special to this place." Anna's focus snapped back to them. She gave them the polite, empty smile she reserved for customers. "Yes, Arthur is very talented," she said, her voice soft. "Can I get you anything else? Another drink, perhaps? Some dessert?" She quickly changed the subject, her discomfort a palpable thing. She couldn't talk about the music. To talk about it would be to acknowledge it, to let it in. And she had spent years building a fortress to keep it out. The night went on, a blur of scribbled orders and heavy trays. It was one of those nights where the restaurant was packed, the energy was high, and the kitchen was running behind. Anna was in the zone, her body moving on autopilot, her mind a blank slate focused only on the next task. The music was there, a constant current beneath the surface, but she was too busy to let it pull her under. Then, around 8 o'clock, the current stopped. Midway through a familiar tune, the music faltered. A few jarring, dissonant notes hung in the air before stopping completely. A few people looked up from their meals, a flicker of confusion on their faces. Anna, who was refilling salt shakers at the service station, froze. She looked over at the piano. Arthur was hunched over the keys, one hand pressed firmly against his chest. His face was pale, beaded with sweat. He took a few shallow breaths, clearly in distress. The manager, a stern but fair man named Mr. Henderson, rushed over from the bar. He spoke to Arthur in a low, urgent voice that was lost in the general din of the restaurant. After a moment, Arthur nodded slowly, looking relieved. He carefully closed the lid over the keys, gathered his sheet music with trembling hands, and, with a final, apologetic look to the room, followed Mr. Henderson towards the back office. A few minutes later, Mr. Henderson re-emerged alone. He went to the host stand and made a quiet announcement. Arthur wasn't feeling well and had to go home for the night. He assured everyone that their meals would still be delicious and hoped they continued to enjoy their evening, but the magic was broken with the music gone. The atmosphere of the restaurant changed instantly. The gentle, comforting hum was replaced by a harsh, noisy clatter. People's conversations seemed louder, more abrupt. The clinking of knives and forks against plates sounded sharp and intrusive. The empty corner with the silent piano felt like a void, a dark hole in the heart of the room. The energy had flatlined. The cozy, romantic ambiance had vanished, replaced by the feeling of just another crowded, noisy eatery. Mr. Henderson stood behind the bar, polishing a glass with a worried frown. He knew how important the music was. He knew that people came to the Gilded Spoon not just for the food, but for the experience. And right now, the experience was broken. His eyes scanned the dining room, his mind racing. He looked at his staff, but they were all busy. The cooks were buried in tickets. The other waitresses were running around like crazy. There was no one. Then his gaze fell upon Anna, who was standing by the kitchen, staring at the empty piano bench with that same familiar, heartbreakingly sad expression. A vague memory surfaced in his mind, something Arthur had mentioned weeks ago. A casual comment about the new, quiet waitress. "She has the hands of a pianist," he had said. A desperate idea began to form in Mr. Henderson's mind. It was a long shot, a crazy shot, but it was better than nothing. It was better than this dead, silent corner. He put down his glass, took a deep breath, and started walking towards her. Mr. Henderson's polished shoes made soft, squeaking sounds on the tiled floor as he left the comfort of his bar station. Each step felt heavy, weighted down by the problem he was carrying. He ran a hand through his neatly combed hair, a gesture of frustration he usually kept private. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the scene. It wasn't a disaster, not yet. The food was still good, the wine was still flowing, but the soul of the place was gone. The Gilded Spoon without music was like a beautiful painting with all the color drained out. It was just a sketch. He saw a couple at a table near the window look towards the silent piano with questioning expressions, then shrug and return to their meal. He noticed another group whose laughter seemed a bit too loud, as if they were trying to fill the empty space themselves. He could feel the vibe shifting. It was subtle, but he knew his business. People came here for an escape, for a little bit of magic, and the magic had just walked out the door with a sick old man. His gaze settled on Anna, standing by the kitchen pass, staring into space. She was the last person on earth he would have pegged for a performer. She was quiet, almost invisible, blending into the background. But Arthur's words echoed in his mind. Asterisk, she has the hands of a pianist. At the time, he had dismissed it as the old man just being friendly, maybe a little senile. But now, in this moment of desperation, it felt like a lifeline. It was a crazy, long shot, but it was the only shot he had. He stopped in front of her, blocking her view of the dining room. Anna blinked, pulled from her thoughts. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a hint of confusion. "Mr. Henderson? Is everything okay? Table 7's food is taking a while." He waved a dismissive hand. "The food is fine. Anna, I need to ask you something." His tone was serious, a little strained. He tried to soften his expression, to make it seem like a casual request, but the urgency was leaking through. Anna's heart gave a little thump of anxiety. She couldn't remember the last time her manager had spoken to her directly about anything other than work. "Okay," she said slowly, her guard going up. Mr. Henderson took a deep breath. Look, he began, his voice low. As you know, Arthur had to leave. And, well, you can hear it. The place feels dead. He gestured vaguely towards the silent corner. I don't suppose... Arthur once mentioned that you play? The question hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Anna felt the blood drain from her face. For a second, the world went silent, the noisy restaurant fading into a distant hum. Play? The word hit her like a physical blow. Her hands, which had been holding a small notepad, suddenly felt cold and clammy. She could feel the eyes of the other waitresses nearby, who were trying to pretend they weren't listening. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She wanted to say no. She wanted to scream it. No, I can't. I don't do that anymore. Please don't ask me to but the words were stuck in her throat. Seeing her hesitation, Mr. Henderson pressed on, his voice becoming a mix of pleading and demanding. He was a businessman, and he saw a problem that needed a solution, no matter how unconventional. I don't care if you just play chopsticks or Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, he said a little too loudly. A few customers at a nearby table turned to look. We need something. Anything is better than this dead air. Just a few simple tunes to fill the quiet. Can you do that for us? For the restaurant? It wasn't really a question. It was an order wrapped in a thin layer of politeness. The pressure was immense. It wasn't just her boss asking. It was the entire restaurant, a silent, expectant audience. She could feel their collective gaze on her, even the ones who weren't looking directly. She felt trapped, like a small animal that had been cornered. Her mind was racing, a chaotic storm of panic and painful memories. The piano, it wasn't just an instrument to her. It was a tomb. It held all the ghosts of her past, all the joy and all the unbearable sorrow. She saw a flash of sunlight hitting ivory keys, a small hand reaching up to copy a larger one. She heard a gentle voice humming a soft melody, a voice filled with so much love it hurt to remember. Please, Anna, Mr. Henderson said, his voice softer now, sensing her distress. Just for a little while. She couldn't explain to him. She couldn't tell him that the last time she had seriously played a piano was the day her world had fallen apart. She couldn't tell him that every note she played was a reminder of what she had lost, a reminder of a promise she had broken to herself and to her mother. To play now, in front of all these people, felt like a betrayal. It felt like desecrating a sacred, painful memory, but what choice did she have? Say no? Risk her job? Create a scene? She was a waitress. She was paid to be invisible, to serve, to not cause trouble. Saying no would be the opposite of all those things. It would make her the center of attention in the worst possible way. She looked at Mr. Henderson's pleading face. She looked at the other staff members, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and relief that they weren't in her shoes. She looked out at the sea of diners, most of them oblivious, but the silence pressing in on them all, with a feeling of utter defeat. Anna gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She couldn't speak. If she opened her mouth, she was afraid she would start crying. A wave of relief washed over Mr. Henderson's face. Great, wonderful, he said, his voice back to its usual booming, cheerful manager tone. Thank you, Anna. I really appreciate it. He gave her a pat on the shoulder, a gesture that felt like a final, gentle push onto a stage she never wanted to be on. She put down her notepad slowly, her movements feeling stiff and robotic. Her legs felt like they were made of lead as she began to walk towards the corner. The short distance from the service station to the piano felt like the longest walk of her life. With every step, the sounds of the restaurant seemed to fade away, replaced by the frantic, pounding beat of her own heart. She could feel dozens of eyes on her back. The quiet girl, the invisible waitress, was now the center of attention. She reached the piano and stood before it, a monolith of polished wood and black and white keys. It looked both beautiful and terrifying. The empty bench seemed to be waiting for her, a judgment seat. The air around it felt thick, heavy with the weight of expectation and her own suffocating memories. She slowly, carefully lifted the lid that covered the keys, the soft click echoing in the strange quiet that had fallen over her section of the room. The keys stared back at her, 100 white soldiers and 100 black soldiers, waiting for a command she was terrified to give. Anna sat on the worn wooden bench, her back ramrod straight. The polished surface of the piano felt cold and unforgiving under her fingertips. The restaurant, which had been a dull roar just moments before, seemed to have fallen into a hushed, expectant silence. She could feel the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on her, a physical pressure that made it hard to breathe. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, a wild, chaotic rhythm that had nothing to do with music. Her fingers, which were usually so steady carrying heavy plates, felt like foreign objects, clumsy and stiff. She stared at the keys. They were just black and white rectangles, but to her they were a minefield. Each one held a memory, a feeling, a ghost. She saw her mother's hands, elegant and graceful, guiding her own small fingers across these same patterns. She heard her mother's voice, soft and encouraging, telling her that music wasn't just about playing the right notes, but about telling a story. But that story had ended, and Anna had closed the book. She had promised herself she would never open it again. Mr. Henderson was watching from the bar, his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of hope and anxiety. The other waitresses were trying to look busy, but they kept glancing over, their faces full of a sympathy that felt almost as heavy as the expectation. She had to do something. She had to play. Taking a shaky breath, Anna placed her fingers on the keys. She decided to start with something simple, something so basic it required no thought at all. A C major scale. Her fingers pressed down, and a series of simple, clear notes filled the air. It was technically correct. Every note was in tune, the rhythm was even, but it was lifeless. It was thin and reedy, a sound devoid of any warmth or emotion. It was the musical equivalent of reading a grocery list aloud. She continued with another simple tune, a children's song she remembered from her childhood. Her hands moved mechanically, her mind a blank wall of panic. She wasn't making music. She was just producing sound. She could feel a slight shift in the atmosphere. A few people who had turned to watch with mild curiosity now turned back to their meals, their interest waning. The soft hum of conversation began to creep back into the room. She was failing. She was just the quiet waitress who couldn't play. Just as they had probably expected, Mr. Henderson sighed from his post behind the bar, running a hand over his face. This was a mistake. A wave of humiliation washed over Anna. She wanted to stop, to stand up, to apologize and run back to the safety of the kitchen. But her fingers were still moving, stuck in their simple, repetitive pattern. She felt a lump form in her throat, hot and painful. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the room, the people, the crushing weight of their disappointment. And then, something changed. With her eyes closed, the world of the restaurant faded away. The clatter of plates, the murmur of voices, the feeling of being watched, it all disappeared. There was only her and the keys and the memory that was fighting its way to the surface. Her fingers, which had been trembling with fear, began to move with a certainty that didn't come from her conscious mind. It was muscle memory, a deep, ingrained knowledge from thousands of hours of practice. The simple, childish melody faltered, hanging in the air for a moment before dissolving into something new. It wasn't a song anyone had ever heard before. It was an original composition. Something she had written years ago, in the quiet of her own room. A piece of music she had never played for another living soul. The new melody began in a low, mournful register. It was a haunting, beautiful tune, full of a deep, aching sadness that everyone in the room could feel. It was the sound of loneliness, of rainy afternoons and empty rooms. It was the sound of loss. The notes were heavy and slow, each one like a teardrop falling onto the surface of still water. The clatter of cutlery against plates slowly ceased. Conversations died mid-sentence. A man putting a forkful of lasagna into his mouth stopped, his hand frozen in mid-air. A young woman listening had a single tear trace a path down her cheek, which she quickly wiped away. The music began to build. A new line of melody, a counterpoint to the sadness, weaved its way in. It was a single, clear note in the treble clef, like a single ray of sunlight breaking through the clouds. It was hesitant at first, questioning, but it grew stronger, more insistent. The music was no longer just sad. It was a conversation, an argument between sorrow and hope. Her left hand played a steady, pulsing rhythm like a heartbeat refusing to give up. Her right hand danced across the higher keys, the melody growing more complex, more urgent. It was the sound of a struggle, a fight against the darkness. People were no longer eating. They were turned towards the corner, completely captivated. Even the kitchen staff had stopped what they were doing, their faces pressed to the small round windows of the swinging doors. Watching in awe, Mr. Henderson had uncrossed his arms and was leaning forward over the bar, his mouth slightly agape. The quiet, invisible waitress was gone, and in her place was a musician, a storyteller, pouring her heart out through 88 black and white keys. Finally, the music soared. The simple, hopeful melody from before returned, but this time it was not hesitant. It was triumphant, full of power and joy. It was layered with rich, complex chords that filled the entire restaurant. It was no longer just sad. It was a story of survival. It was the sound of a spirit that had been broken but had painstakingly, painfully, put itself back together again. It was the sound of a future being born from the ashes of the past. The final chord hung in the air, a powerful, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of everyone listening. It echoed for a long moment in the stunned silence that followed. No one moved. No one spoke. The entire restaurant was frozen in time, held captive by the ghost of a melody that had just filled their hearts. Anna sat with her hands still on the keys, her eyes closed, her chest rising and falling with each deep breath. She was just as lost in the aftermath as they were. Then it started with just one person. An older man, sitting alone at a small table near the window, slowly got to his feet. He began to clap. His applause was slow and deliberate at first, then it grew faster. Another person joined in, then another and another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted into a thunderous standing ovation. It wasn't just polite, nice job applause. It was a roar, a wave of sound so loud and so full of raw emotion that it was overwhelming. People were cheering, whistling, and many were wiping tears from their eyes. Anna's eyes flew open. She looked out at the sea of people on their feet, clapping for her. Their faces were not just polite. They were filled with a genuine, profound appreciation. She saw Mr. Henderson, his face a picture of pure astonishment, clapping harder than anyone. She saw her coworkers, their mouths open in shock. The look on their faces was one of disbelief. They were looking at her as if they were seeing her for the very first time. Her own expression mirrored their shock. The fear, the panic, the humiliation, it was all gone, washed away by the music and the incredible reaction. In its place was a dawning sense of wonder. Where did that come from? The person who had just played that beautiful, heartbreaking song felt like a stranger. But as the applause washed over her, a tiny, fragile feeling began to stir in her chest. It felt a lot like hope. The sound was a physical thing, a wave of warmth and pressure that washed over Anna. It was the roar of 100 people clapping, cheering, whistling, all for her. The noise was so loud, so overwhelming that it felt like it was pushing her backwards, away from the piano and the spotlight she had never asked for. Her heart was still pounding, but now it was a different kind of panic. It was the panic of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. She felt exposed like a private, painful part of her soul had been laid bare for a room full of strangers. Her first instinct was to run, to stand up, mumble an apology, and flee to the familiar, anonymous safety of the kitchen. But her body felt frozen, locked in place by the sheer force of the moment. She just sat there, her hands still resting on the keys, staring out at the sea of faces. They weren't just clapping. Their expressions were filled with a raw, unfiltered emotion that she had only ever seen in movies. Some were smiling broadly, others had tears streaming down their faces. They looked moved. Deeply moved, slowly, awkwardly, Anna began to stand up. As she did, the applause seemed to grow even louder. She gave a small, terrified nod, a gesture of thanks she didn't know how to put into words. She wanted to disappear, but a path back to the kitchen was blocked by a line of people who had left their tables and were now standing near the piano. Waiting to talk to her got an older gentleman. The same man who had started the standing ovation was the first to reach her. He had kind, crinkly eyes and a gentle smile. "Young lady," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I haven't heard anything that beautiful since my wife, God rest her soul, used to play for me. You brought her back to me, just for a moment. Thank you." Before Anna could even process his words, let alone form a response, a younger woman stepped forward. "That song you played," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "was that yours? It felt so real. It was like you were telling my own story." She reached out and gently touched Anna's arm, a gesture of pure, human connection. Anna just stood there, speechless. She was used to being invisible, to people barely looking up from their menus when she took their order. Now, people were looking at her with such intensity, such vulnerability, that it was terrifying and strangely wonderful all at once. A man in a business suit slipped a folded bill into her hand. "This isn't for the food," he said quietly. "This is for the music." It was worth every penny and more. She looked down. It wasn't a 5 or a 10. It was $100 bill. Her eyes widened in shock, unbeknownst to her in a dimly lit corner booth. A college student named Liam was carefully putting his phone away. He had recorded the last 3 minutes of her performance, his hand shaking slightly as he tried to hold the phone steady. He wasn't a vlogger or someone looking for content. He was just a guy who had been completely and utterly captivated. He felt an urgent need to share what he had just witnessed. He quickly typed out a caption and posted the video to his social media feed. "It was just at a restaurant when our waitress got forced to play the piano. I have no words. You have to hear this." Hashtag mystery pianist hashtag talent as the small crowd around Anna began to slowly disperse. Returning to their now cold meals, Mr. Henderson finally made his way over to her. His face was a mask of pure astonishment. He looked at her not as his employee, but as someone he had completely misjudged. "Anna," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. I don't know what to say." That was incredible. Anna just looked at him, still too overwhelmed to speak. He took a deep breath. "I am so sorry," he said, and the apology sounded genuine, "for putting you on the spot like that. I had no idea. I was desperate. I never imagined that." He gestured towards the piano. "That wasn't just music. That was something else entirely." The entire restaurant was spellbound. He looked at her, a new respect in his eyes. "Listen, why don't you take the rest of the night off? With pay, of course. Go home and get some rest. You've more than earned it." Anna could only nod again. She felt like she was moving through a dream. She walked back to the small staff area, her legs feeling unsteady. Her coworkers looked at her with a mixture of awe and confusion. One of the other waitresses, a young woman who usually just complained about her tips, simply gave her a thumbs up and a wide-eyed smile. Anna changed out of her uniform, her movements slow and mechanical. As she was leaving, Mr. Henderson stopped her one last time. "Think about what I said," he told her, his voice low. "We could use music like that here, regularly." The cool night air hit her face as she stepped outside, a welcome shock to her system. The city lights seemed brighter, the sounds of traffic more distant. She began the long walk to her small apartment, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The shame and fear she had associated with the piano were still there, lingering like a shadow. But for the first time, they were joined by something else. A flicker of pride, a sense of wonder. She had faced her greatest fear, and instead of it destroying her, it had created something. It had created a moment of beauty that had touched people. When she got home, she didn't turn on the TV or check her phone. She just sat in the dark and the silence of her small living room and replayed the night in her head. The fear, the music, the applause, the faces. It felt like it had happened to someone else. The next morning, Anna was woken up not by her alarm, but by the persistent, buzzing vibration of her phone on her nightstand. She groaned, rolling over. It was probably just spam. but it kept buzzing over and over again. Annoyed, she finally picked it up. Her screen was a mess of notifications. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of text messages, and thousands of notifications from social media. She had no idea what was going on. Confused, she opened her social media app. Her feed was flooded with one single video. It was a recording from last night. She saw herself sitting at the piano, her back to the camera. She heard the hauntingly beautiful melody fill the room. She watched as her own fingers moved across the keys, creating a music she didn't even know she was capable of sharing with the world. The video had been shared over 50,000 times. The caption read, "Was just at a restaurant when our waitress got forced to play the piano. I have no words. You have to hear this." She scrolled through the comments, her eyes wide with disbelief. Who is this woman? We need to know. One person wrote, "I'm not crying, you're crying." "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," said another. "What is this song? I need to download it immediately." A local news blog had already picked up the story, with the headline, "Mystery Waitress Stuns Diners with Impromptu Piano Performance." Who is the Gilded Spoon's angel of music? Anna dropped the phone onto her bed, her heart pounding. The quiet, invisible waitress was gone. In her place was a mystery pianist, a viral sensation, a person thousands of strangers were suddenly desperate to know. Her carefully constructed, quiet world had been blown wide open, and she had no idea how to piece it back together. The buzzing of her phone was a relentless, angry wasp trapped in a jar. Anna buried her head under her pillow, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. It was the sound of the world she had so carefully built for herself, a world of quiet routines and invisible walls, crumbling to dust. With a groan of defeat, she reached for the device. The screen lit up her dark bedroom, a blinding explosion of notifications. Thousands of them. Her heart, which had just started to slow down from the night before, began to pound again, a wild, frantic rhythm against her ribs. She sat up, her back against the headboard, and began to scroll. Her own face, or rather the back of her own head, was everywhere. The video from the restaurant had been shared, reposted, and retweeted into the digital stratosphere. Local news blogs had headlines like, "Mystery Pianist Brings Diners to Tears at the Gilded Spoon." By mid-morning, even the bigger citywide news sites were picking it up. Who is the viral waitress with the gift of a concert pianist? She read the comments, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and wonder. I've watched this 10 times and I cry every time. This music is what healing sounds like. Someone give this woman a record deal? Forget a record deal, someone give her a hug. You can feel her pain and her strength. They saw it. They actually saw it. They saw the story in the music, the story she had never been able to tell with words. It was terrifying, but it was also validating. The thought of going to work that afternoon was almost unbearable. What would it be like? Would people point and stare? Would they ask her to play again? She felt a wave of nausea. She had spent years perfecting the art of being invisible, and now she was the most visible person in the city. She considered calling in sick, just hiding in her apartment until the storm passed. But she knew it wouldn't pass. This was a new reality, and running from it wouldn't make it go away. With a deep breath, she got dressed and headed to the Gilded Spoon. As she pushed through the front door, she braced herself for the worst. But the scene that greeted her was not what she expected. The restaurant was already busy, but with a different kind of crowd. There were people she didn't recognize, people holding phones and cameras, all looking towards the empty piano with hopeful expressions. Her coworkers, instead of looking at her with pity or jealousy, gave her small, encouraging smiles. The other waitress from the night before gave her a little wave. "You're a celebrity," she whispered with a grin. Mr. Henderson spotted her and immediately came out from behind the bar. He walked up to her, his expression one of genuine respect. "Anna," he said, his voice low and serious, "can we talk for a minute in my office?" Her stomach clenched. This was it. The lecture about causing a scene, the awkward conversation about her future at the restaurant. She followed him into the small, cluttered office in the back, her hands clenched into fists. He closed the door and turned to her. First, I want to apologize again for how I spoke to you. I was stressed and I wasn't thinking. I had no right to put you in that position. Anna just stood there, unsure of what to say. But I am so glad I did, he continued, a small smile playing on his lips. Anna, what you did last night, it was extraordinary. I've been in this business for 30 years and I've never seen anything like it. The way you captivated that room, it was magic. He took a step closer. I've been getting calls all morning. News stations, talent agents, people wanting to know who you are. I told them I had to respect your privacy. But it got me thinking. We have an empty piano, and you have a gift that turns this little restaurant into a special place. He paused, looking her directly in the eye. I want to offer you a new job. I don't want you to be a waitress anymore. I want you to be our pianist. You can play whatever you want, your own music, whatever you feel. We'll work out a schedule that's good for you, and of course we will pay you significantly more than what you're making now. What do you say? Anna was speechless. A job? A job playing the piano. The instrument that had been the source of so much pain was now being offered to her as a lifeline, a career. It was too much to process. I need to think about it, she finally managed to say. Of course, Mr. Henderson said, nodding. Of course. Take all the time you need. The offer stands. She left his office in a daze. The rest of her shift was a blur. She moved through the restaurant on autopilot, her mind racing. A job playing music? It was a dream she had buried so deep she had forgotten it even existed when she finally got home that night. Long after her shift had ended, she collapsed onto her bed and picked up her phone. She had hundreds of new messages. Most were from strangers, but one, buried in the avalanche of notifications, caught her eye. It was an email. The subject line read, "Inquiry regarding your performance at the Gilded Spoon." She opened it with a sense of dread. It was probably another journalist, but it wasn't. It was from a professor at the city's prestigious music conservatory, a place she had only ever dreamed of attending. "Dear Miss," the email began, "my name is Dr. Alistair Finch, and I am the head of the piano department here at the conservatory. Someone sent me a video of your performance last night, and I must admit I was utterly stunned. Your technical skill is remarkable, but it was your original composition that truly captured my attention. It is a work of profound emotional depth and sophisticated musicality. It is clear that you have a rare and exceptional gift." Anna's breath caught in her throat. She read on, her heart beating faster with every word. "I don't know the circumstances of your life or your musical training," the email continued, "but I feel it would be a tragedy for a talent like yours to go unnurtured. We have a special program here for non-traditional students, individuals who may have taken a different path in life but possess a unique artistic voice. I would be honored to offer you a full scholarship to join our program this coming fall. We would provide you with private instruction, performance opportunities, and a chance to explore your potential to the fullest. Please consider my offer. I believe you have something truly important to say with your music, and I would be thrilled to help you find your voice." She read the email 3 times, then 4 times. A full scholarship to the conservatory. It wasn't just a job. It was a future. It was a second chance. The fear and shame that had been her constant companions for years suddenly felt smaller, less powerful. They were still there, a faint echo in the back of her mind. But they were being drowned out by a new, powerful feeling, hope. The amazing thing that happened after she was forced to play the piano wasn't the viral video, or the standing ovation, or even the job offer. It was this. It was the email from a stranger who had seen the real her. The person she had been hiding for so long and had offered her a way back, a way to reclaim the part of herself that she thought was lost forever. The story doesn't end with her accepting the offer. It ends the next evening. Anna is sitting in her small, quiet apartment. The city lights twinkle outside her window, but she doesn't notice them. Her attention is on the old upright piano that has been gathering dust in the corner of her living room for years. She had always avoided it, a painful reminder of a life she had lost, but tonight she walks over to it and sits on the bench. She places her fingers on the keys, and for the first time in a long time she is not afraid. She closes her eyes and she begins to play. It's a new song, one she has never played before. The music is not filled with the same haunting sadness as the song from the restaurant. This melody is different. It's tentative at first, like a seedling pushing its way through the soil, but it grows stronger, more confident with every passing bar. It's a song filled with a quiet, gentle hope. It's the sound of a future being reclaimed, one note at a time. The quiet waitress was gone, and in her place was a musician, finally ready to play her own song.